Wait, before your mind runs ahead again, before you create another story that hurts you, just pause here for a moment. Something is quietly shifting, and if you listen closely, you'll realize, not everything you've been believing is true. There's a pattern you've been repeating, almost without noticing. A thought appears, soft at first, then it grows louder, then it becomes a feeling. And suddenly, it feels real. So real that your heart reacts as if it has already happened. But let me ask you something. Have you ever stopped and questioned where that thought truly came from? Because what you're feeling right now, this quiet fear, this lingering doubt, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It formed slowly, piece by piece, through silence, through distance, through moments where you didn't have all the answers. And in those empty spaces, your mind began to fill in the gaps. Not with truth, but with possibilities. And those possibilities, they began to look like reality. You started imagining another presence, another person, someone who doesn't even have a face, yet feels so real in your mind. You began comparing yourself to someone who may not even exist. You began questioning your worth, your place, your connection. But here's something most people never realize. Sometimes, the mind doesn't try to protect you with truth, it tries to protect you with control. So it creates scenarios, prepares you for pain that hasn't happened, convinces you that expecting the worst will somehow make it hurt less. But does it? Or does it slowly drain you, little by little, until even the beautiful moments start to feel uncertain? There's something deeper happening beneath all of this, something quiet, something you haven't fully seen yet. Because this isn't really about another person. No, listen carefully, this is about something within you that is asking to be understood. There were moments, subtle ones, where things felt slightly different. Maybe their energy shifted, maybe their words became fewer, maybe their presence felt distant even when they were right there. And in those moments, instead of clarity, you received silence. And silence, when misunderstood, can feel louder than any answer. So your mind stepped in. It tried to explain what your heart couldn't process. It tried to give you certainty in a situation that felt uncertain. And the easiest explanation it found was the one that hurt the most. What if there's someone else? That question didn't come from nowhere. It came from a need for reassurance that was never fully met. But what if, just for a second, you consider another possibility? What if the story you've been telling yourself is only one version, not the truth? Stay with this, don't let your mind rush past it, because something important is waiting right here. There's a difference between intuition and fear disguised as intuition. And most people never learn how to tell the difference. Intuition feels calm, even when it's strong. Fear feels urgent, restless, it keeps repeating itself, trying to convince you faster than you can question it. So ask yourself honestly, what you've been feeling, does it bring clarity, or does it keep you trapped in a loop? Because if it's a loop, then it's not guiding you, it's keeping you stuck. And here's where things begin to shift. What if the distance you felt wasn't about someone else entering their life, but about something they themselves are going through? What if their silence had nothing to do with replacing you, but everything to do with something they haven't been able to express? You see, not all distance is betrayal. Sometimes, it's confusion. Sometimes, it's pressure. Sometimes, it's a person trying to figure themselves out, without knowing how to explain it. But when you're on the outside of that silence, it feels like rejection. And that's where your thoughts begin to build stories. Slowly, quietly, convincingly. And before you know it, you're no longer reacting to reality, you're reacting to a version of reality your mind created to protect you. Let me say something that might surprise you. The pain you've been feeling is real, but the reason behind it may not be what you think. Just sit with that for a second, because this changes everything. You've been trying to solve a mystery that may not even exist, while ignoring the deeper truth that's trying to reach you. And the more you chase that imagined answer, the further you move from what's actually happening. There's a subtle shift occurring, something you haven't fully noticed yet. Their energy, your energy, the connection between you, it hasn't disappeared. It has changed. And change, when not understood, can feel like loss. But not all change is loss. Sometimes, it's preparation. Sometimes, it's a pause before something deeper unfolds. But your mind, it doesn't like pauses. It fills them with noise. And that noise has been telling you a story that keeps you anxious, keeps you questioning, keeps you from seeing clearly. Don't skip this part, because this is where most people turn away, right before understanding begins. There's something you need to realize. You've been looking outward for answers, when the first truth was always meant to be seen within. Why did that thought affect you so deeply? Why did the idea of someone else feel so heavy? It's not just about them, it's about what that idea represents to you. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough, fear of losing something you haven't fully secured yet. And those fears, they don't come from this moment alone. They come from layers, past experiences, unspoken doubts, quiet insecurities that were never fully healed. So when the situation became unclear, those layers surfaced. Not because they are true, but because they were waiting to be seen. And now, here you are, standing between what you feel and what is real. But here's where everything begins to turn. What if this moment isn't here to break you, but to show you something you've been avoiding? Something important is waiting just beyond this realization. And in the next moment, you're going to start seeing why this entire situation isn't what it looks like at all. And yet, something inside you still whispers, but what if I'm right? That quiet voice, it doesn't shout, it lingers. It waits for silence, and then it returns again, placing the same question in your mind, as if repetition will somehow turn it into truth. But look closer at that voice, not what it says, but how it feels. Does it bring you peace, or does it pull you deeper into uncertainty? Because there's a moment, very subtle, where doubt stops being a question, and starts becoming a habit. And once it becomes a habit, it no longer needs evidence, it only needs your attention. You've been feeding it, without even realizing it. Every time you replay a small change, every time you read into a delayed response, every time you imagine a hidden meaning behind simple actions, you add another layer to a story that was never fully confirmed. Pause, feel that. How many times have you created an entire scenario, only to realize later that it wasn't real? And yet, this one feels different, doesn't it? Because this time, your emotions are deeper. Your connection feels more meaningful. And that's exactly why your mind is working harder, trying to protect something that matters to you. But protection, when misunderstood, can quietly turn into self-torment. And that's where you've been standing, in between caring deeply and fearing silently. There's something else you haven't noticed yet. Their silence, it hasn't been consistent. Think about that. There were moments, small, almost unnoticed, where their energy returned, where their presence felt familiar again, where something unspoken passed between you, something that didn't match the story you've been telling yourself. But those moments, you didn't hold on to them. Why? Because doubt is louder than reassurance when you're already uncertain. So your mind filtered them out, dismissed them as temporary, and went back to the narrative it had already started building. But what if those moments were actually the truth trying to reach you? Stay here, don't rush past this, because something is beginning to reveal itself. Not everything that feels distant is disconnected. Sometimes, A person pulls back not because they're moving away, but because they're trying to understand something within themselves that they don't yet have words for. And when someone doesn't have clarity, they often choose silence over confusion. But from where you stand, that silence feels like absence. And absence, when mixed with imagination, creates stories that feel almost impossible to ignore. You began to notice patterns that weren't really patterns, connections that weren't really there, signs that only existed because your mind was searching for confirmation. It's not your fault, it's human. But now, you're being invited to see beyond that, because something doesn't align. If there truly was someone else, would the energy feel this uncertain, this inconsistent, this incomplete? Or would it feel final, distant in a way that leaves no space for doubt? Think about that carefully, because what you've been feeling isn't closure, it's confusion. And confusion doesn't come from endings, it comes from things that are still unresolved. Something is still unfolding here, quietly, beneath everything you've been assuming. And you've been standing right in the middle of it, without seeing it clearly. There's a deeper layer to this, something you haven't fully touched yet. Your heart, it hasn't let go. Not because it's holding on to something false, but because it senses that the story isn't complete. And that feeling, it's very different from denial. It's subtle, steady, almost quiet compared to the loudness of your thoughts. But it's there. Now ask yourself this, and be honest. If everything was truly over, if there was truly someone else, would there still be this pull? Or would there be a clear, undeniable distance that leaves no questions behind? You already know the answer, don't you? This is why something inside you keeps searching, keeps wondering, keeps returning to this connection. Not because you're imagining something, but because something hasn't fully revealed itself yet. Don't skip this moment, because this is where your perspective begins to shift. You've been looking for proof of loss, while ignoring the signs of something still present. And those signs, they've been subtle. A tone, a pause, an unspoken emotion, a moment where everything felt the same again, even if only for a second. Those are not accidents. Those are glimpses. Glimpses of something that hasn't disappeared, only changed form. But your mind, it prefers clear answers. So in the absence of clarity, it created one. And that answer became the source of your unrest. But what if you don't need to chase answers right now? What if, instead, you allow things to reveal themselves naturally? Because forcing clarity often pushes it further away. There's a timing to everything, even understanding. And right now, you're at the edge of something important. Something that will make you look back at all these thoughts and see them differently. The feeling you've been carrying, it's not pointing you toward someone else. It's pointing you toward a truth that hasn't fully surfaced yet. And as this truth begins to rise, slowly, quietly, you're going to realize something that changes the way you see this entire situation. But that realization, it's not ready to fully show itself just yet. It's closer than you think, and in the next moment, everything starts to connect in a way you didn't expect. But here's the moment where everything begins to turn, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way so quiet, you could miss it if you're still holding on to the old story. Because something doesn't fit anymore. The version of reality you've been replaying, it starts to feel slightly off. Not completely wrong, but not fully right either. Like a puzzle piece that almost connects, but never quite locks into place. And that discomfort, that subtle misalignment, it's not confusion. It's awareness beginning to wake up. Think about this for a second. If there truly was another presence taking your place, why would their energy still reach for you in moments you didn't expect? Why would there still be a softness, a familiarity, a connection that refuses to completely fade? That's not how replacement feels. Replacement is clean, distant, final. What you're experiencing is none of those. It's unfinished. And unfinished things, they don't disappear quietly. They linger. They shift. They wait. Now pause here, because something important is unfolding beneath this realization. You've been trying to protect your heart by preparing for loss, but in doing so, you may have started to disconnect from what is still present. Not intentionally, not consciously, but slowly. Because when you expect distance, you begin to create it within yourself first. You pull back your energy, you guard your emotions, you hesitate in moments where you once felt natural. And that shift, subtle as it is, doesn't go unnoticed. Energy responds to energy. So what happens when both sides begin to feel uncertain, at the same time? Silence grows. Not because of someone else, but because both of you are standing at a distance created by unspoken thoughts. Let that sink in. This isn't a story of someone being replaced. It's a moment where two people, both feeling something deeply, are struggling to understand it at the same time. And instead of clarity, there is pause. Instead of expression, there is hesitation. Instead of answers, there is space. But space doesn't always mean separation. Sometimes, it's where realization begins. Don't skip this part, because this is where most people misunderstand everything. You assumed that their silence meant they were moving toward someone else. But what if their silence was actually them standing still, trying to process something they don't yet understand? What if, in their own way, they've been just as confused as you? That changes the entire picture, doesn't it? Because now, it's no longer about competition. It's about clarity that hasn't arrived yet. And here's something even deeper. The connection you feel, it hasn't weakened. It has become quieter, more subtle, but it's still there. You notice it in moments you can't explain. A sudden thought, a feeling that appears out of nowhere, a sense that something is happening beneath the surface. That's not imagination. That's awareness trying to guide you beyond your assumptions. But to hear it, you have to soften the noise. And the loudest noise right now has been the story you created out of fear. Just for a moment, imagine letting that story go. Not forever, just for now. Imagine stepping outside of it, and looking at everything without that filter. What do you see? Not what you fear, but what is actually there. You might notice something surprising. The connection hasn't ended. It hasn't been replaced. It has paused, shifted, moved into a space where something deeper is being formed, but not yet expressed. And that space, it can feel uncomfortable, because it requires patience. It requires trust, not in them, but in your ability to stay grounded without needing immediate answers. This is where your strength quietly grows, not in certainty, but in staying open, without letting fear take control. Something important is waiting for you in this understanding, because once you stop chasing imagined outcomes, you begin to notice real signals. Subtle ones, but true. And those signals, they don't point toward someone else. They point toward something unfinished, something still finding its way. Stay with this feeling, don't rush to conclude it. Because the moment you stop forcing the story, the truth begins to reveal itself naturally. And what's coming next, it won't feel like confusion anymore. It will feel like recognition. Like finally seeing something that was always there, but hidden behind your own thoughts. And when that moment arrives, you'll understand why everything had to unfold this way, why the silence existed, why the distance felt so real. Because it was never leading where you thought it was. It was leading somewhere completely unexpected, and in the next part, that direction becomes impossible to ignore. And just when you think you've understood it, something even quieter begins to surface. Not a thought this time, not a question, but a feeling that doesn't need words. It arrives without announcement, almost like a soft realization brushing past your awareness, and for a second, everything inside you goes still. Because suddenly, you're not searching anymore. You're noticing. There's a difference. Searching feels restless, like you're chasing something just out of reach. But noticing, it feels calm, grounded, as if the answer was never far, only hidden beneath the noise. And this is where everything gently rearranges itself. Because now, instead of asking, "Is there someone else?" a different awareness begins to form. What if I was never meant to compete for something that already holds space for me? Let that sit with you, just for a moment. Because the energy you've been feeling, the connection that keeps returning in subtle ways, it's not something easily replaced. It doesn't vanish quietly. It transforms. And transformation often looks like distance before it looks like clarity. You felt the shift, but you interpreted it as loss. You noticed the silence, but you understood it as absence. And in doing so, you unknowingly stepped into a story that was never fully yours to carry. But now, something is loosening. The weight you've been holding, it's not gripping you the same way anymore. Not because everything has suddenly been explained, but because you're beginning to see without distortion. And when perception changes, reality feels different. There's a moment you might remember, small, almost forgotten, where everything felt simple again. A look, a word, a feeling that passed between you without effort. At the time, you didn't hold on to it. But now, it returns to your awareness, clearer than before. Why? Because that moment was never part of the fear. It was part of the truth. Stay here, don't rush ahead. Because something important is unfolding in this stillness. You're beginning to recognize that not every silence carries a hidden story. And not every pause means something is slipping away. Sometimes, silence is where emotions deepen, where thoughts settle, where clarity quietly prepares itself before being spoken. But if you fill that silence too quickly with fear, you miss what it was trying to become. And that's exactly what happened. You filled the unknown with assumptions. And those assumptions became your reality. But now, you're stepping out of that. Slowly, gently, without forcing it. And as you do, something unexpected begins to happen. The connection you once questioned, it starts to feel different again. Not louder, not overwhelming, but steadier. Like something that was always there, waiting for you to see it without interference. This is the part most people overlook. They wait for dramatic signs, clear answers, undeniable proof. But real understanding, it rarely arrives like that. It comes quietly, through moments of awareness, through shifts in perception, through feelings that don't need explanation. And right now, you're in that moment. Something important is waiting for you here. Don't skip past it. Because this is where your energy begins to realign. You stop reacting to imagined outcomes and start responding to what is actually present. And what is present is not absence. It's space. Space that hasn't been filled yet, not with someone else, but with clarity that is still forming. Let yourself feel that difference. Because it changes everything. You're no longer standing in fear of being replaced. You're standing in awareness of something that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. And that awareness, it brings a quiet kind of strength. Not loud, not forceful, but steady, grounded, certain in a way that doesn't need constant reassurance. Now listen closely, because this is where it becomes undeniable. The connection hasn't been taken from you. It hasn't been given to someone else. It has simply moved through a phase you didn't fully understand, until now. And as this understanding settles within you, you'll begin to notice something even more unexpected. Their energy, their presence, their way of showing up. It starts to shift again, not because you chased it, but because you stopped chasing the wrong story. And that is where everything begins to come back into alignment. But what happens next? It won't unfold the way you expect. Because the truth that's been forming all this time is about to reveal itself in a way that feels both surprising and deeply familiar at the same time.